Hi, everyone. I'm just letting a few people log on and then we'll get started.
Angela, will folks be putting questions into the chat? Was that a yes? Okay.
Yeah, Amy's going to monitor that.
Okay.
Oh, people are starting to log on. That's great. We're just going to give it a few more minutes and then we'll get started. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, What Matters Most, Making End-of-Life Choices and Directives. My name is the Reverend Angela Matalone, and I'm the Director of Spiritual Services at Northern Westchester Hospital. And I'd like to introduce to you our panel today. We have Dr. Iris Wertham, who is a board certified gynecologic oncologist and bioethicist. We have Catherine Griffin, who is the Director of Nursing Case Management at Northern Westchester Hospital. We have Dr. Lizette Smith, who is the Medical Director of Palliative Care at Northern Westchester Hospital. And we have Maura Laidlaw, who is a partner at Hollis, Laidlaw and Simon. We are so grateful for all of you to join us today and being a part of this panel. This webinar was created as a perceived need we discovered as we cared for our patients and families, both in the hospital, in private practice, and in our communities of faith. And, you know, for many people, we don't like to think about our mortality. It's not fun, right? So practitioners in healthcare are included in this too. So we put off the conversation and can be caught off guard, not knowing what our loved ones may want or what making choices or decisions really mean for us. And, you know, I'm part of the ethics committee here at the hospital, as is Dr. Wertheim and Dr. Smith and Dr. Griffin and Katie Griffin. And, you know, we see it over and over again, cases brought to us. And so we thought if we had some kind of, you know, webinar that could help people understand exactly what all of this is about, it would be helpful. So with that in mind, I would like to turn it over to our first speaker. And as I said before, Dr. Wertheim, you know, physicians often have the most contact with patients. And, you know, but there sometimes is this reluctance to have the conversation, even while people are relatively healthy. And so I just was hoping you might be able to speak to a little bit more of your experience with patients in the area.
Yeah, so thank you for having me on the panel and welcome to all the community that's logged in. Yeah, I think that it's such an important topic for discussion, and it's something that we often are reluctant to talk about. We often put it off. And, you know, just like anything else in life, the more prepared we are in every way, more likely you'll have an easier time of it. Not that it'll make everything have a perfect outcome, but the idea is that if while we're healthy and living our lives the way we like to live them, we can start thinking about what it might be like if things changed, if we do get sick, if we are hospitalized, if we can't live the life that we like to live, what kinds of things are important to us? What kinds of things do we want our loved ones to know? Because it's possible, and it's true for most of us as we age, that there may come a time where, for one reason or another, we're unable to articulate or to express clearly what those wishes are. And so the idea is, and certainly as a, having been a practicing physician for so many years, and now my interest in, the ethical piece of all this is that it's very, very clear that the more we know about you, the more we know about what folks really value, the easier it is to facilitate decisions about healthcare, not necessarily the end of life, but about healthcare in general, that feels right to everybody. And so often what we see, as Reverend was alluding to, is that oftentimes when people don't articulate those choices, and I don't even mean formally, like writing it down or getting a lawyer, but just talking about it, we're left with, the folks taking care of somebody who's sick or near the end of life, and then a family member or loved one who is either kind of guessing or trying their best to make what we call a substituted judgment, but having never actually heard it articulated, it makes it much harder for everybody. So that's basically that's the pitch here, is if nothing else, think about it, talk about it, and acknowledge that, gee, something might happen to me where somebody else may be making a decision for me. And the more I let them know what's important to me, the better things may go.
And I would also imagine it would direct a person's care as as people went from healthy to not so healthy,
Yeah, so I think on that point, I think that one of the things that contributes to the reluctance is that people are afraid that what they say or write down is going to be somehow like binding, or we're going to have to stick to it. And so, yes, it does guide care, but also people should know that it's not etched in stone. It's just an expression of a preference. It doesn't mean, especially if what's expressed doesn't really apply, doesn't make sense at the time when decisions are being made. So it's not, people change their mind, and that's okay. And
Right.
family members can even say, my mom changed her mind, or, she used to be this way, now she's this way. So I think, to your point, yes, it's very important, especially as a physician, to know what was expressed and to guide recommendations and treatment decisions. But also people need to bear in mind that no one's going to you don't get held to it like it's etched in stone.
Right, right. But and that's so true. People I think might be more apt to do it if they know it's not really binding in some ways. But again, it's like, what is quality of life for a particular person, and to know what that quality of life is. I joke with my daughter all the time, if I can't eat lasagna anymore, Chelsea, I'm done. It's I'm joking, but that's what it's important to know what makes for a quality of life with someone.
Yeah, no, you're right. Like, what does a good day look like?
Right.
What
Is
would
this
a good
course
day
of
look like?
treatment going to
Yes.
make it a good day or make it worse? So yeah, thank you so much.
Of course.
We're going to go through having our panelists speak to us, and then we'll have questions at the end. If you do have a question or a point for clarification, you feel free to write it in the chat, and we will address it. Our next speaker is going to be Catherine Griffin, who is the Director of Nursing Case Management. And as I was saying, I make rounds a lot on the hospital, and sometimes those who are caring for them, the nurses, the PCAs, and, sometimes have trouble with, giving care that they think is actually hurting people because there aren't any directives in place, like what we were talking about of what is quality of life and what is not. And what has been your experience dealing with patients and caregivers?
So Angela, it's a very good point. Good afternoon, everybody. And again, thank you for having me. But Angela's point is very well taken. This actually happens a lot. And it does cause a lot of what we term caregiver stress. Our physicians, nurses, all of our care team are here to help people, obviously not to harm them. And depending on the decisions that are made at times, it can feel that way. I'm sure everyone can appreciate that some medical treatments are not without discomfort. They are not without side effects. They may make the person actually seem worse or take away the quality, perceived quality of their life. It may make what was a good day into a bad day. And this doesn't always feel good to the caregivers that are rendering this care. And, it sometimes feels in conflict with what we think the patient might want. Patients sometimes have difficulty talking about this with their loved ones because they like to protect their loved ones. They feel responsible for their loved ones and they don't want to burden them with these decisions. So we see patients who sometimes endure things that they would perhaps rather not because their family member, their loved one wants them to give it a try, to go through with it. These are difficult situations for everybody involved. And, sometimes we have patients who, on the other hand, don't want to go through treatment, yet their family or loved one is pushing for treatment. And those are difficult situations to try to navigate through, which is why, going back to Dr. Wertheim's point earlier on, that the conversations that you have early on in life when everything's going along fine are extremely important. And we can't possibly plan for every scenario that might occur and provide direction to our loved ones or to our physicians on how we would like each scenario handled, because life is unpredictable. We don't know what's going to happen to us in the future. But sharing with our loved ones and our physicians, what we would want done under the most basic of circumstances, what we feel is right for us in terms of, yes, I want to pursue, if I should develop a terminal cancer, I want to pursue treatment to the nth degree, and I will literally die trying to be cured. Some people, that's their choice. And that's their choice. That's a fine choice for them. For other people, that's the farthest thing from what they want. Should they get diagnosed with that terminal cancer, they're going to go out and live their life. They're not going to look back. They're not going to get treated. They're going to go on that cruise. They're going to spend all their money. They're going to do whatever it is they wanted to do and check off everything on their bucket list until such time comes as it's over. And it's a very personal decision. Much the same way that we come into this world these days, and expectant parents make all kinds of elaborate birthing plans, and where do they want to have their baby, and what do they want that experience to be like, and who should be there, and what should it feel like, and the whole journey they navigate exiting this life needs to require the same amount of thought. It is a journey, and it is a personal journey, and there's people that travel that road with you, but you should share with them the way you want that journey to go, because left up to their own devices, it seems most of the time your daughter, your son, your husband, your wife, they may make a different choice because it's hard for them to make the choice for solely you, because they're part of that choice. They're making the choice for them too. And without clear direction from you on how you want this to go for you and you alone, they can't help but enter in their own emotions and their own feelings on the situation. It's hard to say to a physician and a care team, stop treating mom and let mom go, because you're going to lose mom if you do that. It's very hard to do. But if mom gave you permission to do that when she was well, and you reiterated it over time, and you knew that that's what she would want, as the daughter, you're doing what mom wanted, which is all we all want to do. We always want to do what our mom wants us to do from the time we were little kids. You know, you feel like you're doing the right thing then, but it's important to know what that is.
Katie, I love what you said about having a birth plan. I mean, when I heard you say that, I just kind of put it in a different perspective for me. That was wonderful. I mean, we all, when we birth plans are like the thing these days, you know, and, you know, people we love might not agree with our birth plan, but they're going to go along with it because they know that's what we wanted. You know, I wanted to have my kids with midwives, and my parents thought I was out of my mind. But, you know, because I had my birth plan and I had my midwives, they went along with it. And so I love that analogy. That is such a great one, really.
I mean, some people, unfortunately, aren't given the luxury of time to make a plan. You know, sometimes death comes very suddenly. So there's not time to plan ahead, but it's going to happen to all of us. That's a simple fact of life. And regardless of how old we may be, once we're of adult age, and once you're involved in relationships with other people, children, spouses, and so on, or you're caretaking for others, these are really important things to understand about the other person. Because otherwise, you know, we see it so often that people stand in an emergency room or in a patient room in the hallway, and they're just dumbfounded. They don't know what to think. They don't know what to decide. They don't know what to tell us to do. And sometimes time is of the essence. Like, we need to know right now what you want us to do.
Right.
And it's so much pressure, and it's so unpleasant for that family member that it breaks your heart. It really breaks your heart. And it makes the staff feel like we're really pressuring people, and none of us can make good decisions in that kind of circumstance.
Right. And again, that's the stressing the importance of making the decisions or thinking about decisions. Not that they're like, you can't change your mind, but while you're still healthy, having those conversations. Because you have 9 months to make your birth plan, right? So you have, you know, make your, I don't want to call it a death plan, but make your end of life desire plan known before you know, you're in that situation you just described, where emotions are running high and you can't make those decisions.
It's just much, much harder. And, you know, the part that's heartbreaking at times is, you know, however things shake out, you know, when the situations are over and done and the loved one has passed away, that family member lives with that experience for their days going forward. And this is something I learned early on, the impact that us as healthcare providers and professional caregivers, people remember us for years because we were there with them at that time. And it's kind of a really big responsibility, I found, over the course of my career. And it's really important to help them have the most peaceful experience they can have during that time, because they do take that with them when they leave. And it can either haunt them or it can console them into the future. So helping us help you and help your loved ones is kind of what this is all about. And I guess in part, this webinar is a little bit selfish, because, you know, if more people were prepared with what their wishes were, it would make our jobs easier. But the reason it makes it easier for us is because we can make it easier for you.
Exactly. Exactly. We're trying to make everyone have, you know, the best experience under difficult and challenging experience.
Right.
challenging circumstances.
Right.
Thank you. And now I'm going to joke for a minute, Dr. Smith, because, you know, sometimes when I walk into a room, people say, the chaplain's here, are they not telling me something? You know, and oftentimes we joke that that's the same thing when you come into a room, right, as the director of palliative care. And so we thought it might be helpful to talk a little bit about the difference between palliative care and hospice care, because they're not the same. And, you know, so we would love to hear your experience.
Thank you, Angela. And that's a great question, because it's one of the most common myths in my field is that palliative care is synonymous with hospice. And, you know, the first thing I do when I go into the room basically is say, you know, listen, I am not from hospice. So palliative care, it's confusing. Even providers don't fully understand what we do. It's really a specialty that focuses on supportive care for people with chronic illnesses. We assist with symptom management, both physical, emotional, and spiritual, in order to really promote the best quality of life. And we also provide support to the caregivers, usually family, and assist them in making some of these complex medical decisions. And as a part of that, going back to what Iris was saying, we want to know like who these people are. What does a good day look like to you? How do you define quality? And in order to do that, a lot of times fortunately, I'm given the gift of spending a lot of time with my patients, and I can ask them, you know, like, what, tell me about you and what means most to you. Because people are actually, we want to learn about the people, because people are more than a compilation of diagnoses, like that they may have all these illnesses, but it doesn't really define them. So by learning about who the human being is, we can try and align what their medical treatments really with their goals and wishes. And palliative care can be practiced at any stage of a person's illness, from the very beginning of diagnosis up until the very, very end. And it's very compatible with aggressive, life-prolonging treatment, chemo, radiation, surgery, cardiac surgery, dialysis. You know, sometimes I just go into the room and I sit with a patient, I listen to them just talk about their struggles. And, you know, I joke, I always let them vent, you know, for 45 minutes, and it helps, you know, I think that, you know, the difference going along with what hospice is, to make it clear, hospice is a form of palliative care. And it's really reserved for the end stages of an illness when there's no more life prolonging or curative treatment involved. So it's really, most of palliative care is not hospice, but hospice is a form of palliative care. And oftentimes people get confused by that. And, you know, I think that's one of the major things that I like to come across when I meet with patients. And, you know, going back to what also what Katie was talking about, most of what I do is really figuring out what patients' goals are and what do they want. And if you can tell your family like what your wishes are, when you're able to make those decisions, when you have the capacity to do that, it is such a gift. It is a gift to your family. It is a gift to your loved ones. Just knowing like, this is what mom wanted, or this is what, you know, grandma wanted. It is so important. And, you know, one of the other things I do like to stress is that in figuring out what your goals and wishes are, there is no right or wrong answer. You know, if you want the most aggressive form of treatment and you don't want to give up, then that's okay. Like, it's not like there's some magical right answer. Sometimes I think people feel pressured. They want to please, you know, the physician or the nurse practitioner. They want to tell us what we want to hear. But to make, you know, the goal is never to have any pressure on patients or families, because each patient is unique. Each family is unique, and, you know, it's a process, and we're just here to guide you and to be with you and help walk with you alongside of you.
Thanks so much, Liz. Sometimes people, when they get to the point of hospice care, I hear this a lot from families. It feels to them like they're giving up, everything it's all over.
Exactly.
And, I like to redirect it as, we're not stopping treatment. We're changing the direction and the goal of treatment.
Changing course. And that's another excellent point, because, hospice is a philosophy of care, and it also is a medical benefit. And, a physician or a nurse practitioner has to basically estimate that if once you go on hospice, if your illness follows its usual course, your life expectancy is 6 months or less. Now, there's nothing magical about 6 months. It was a number that Medicare came up with. We refer patients to hospice so late in this country. So, people hear that and they think, oh my God, I'm going to pass away tomorrow. And I have patients who are living comfortably, living well, focusing on their symptoms. And sometimes 6 months go by and you know what? They get recertified for hospice. Sometimes they get kicked off of hospice because they're too healthy. It's just a matter of finding what works for people and giving them all the benefits that they're entitled to.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And now we've heard a lot about advanced directives and, how do we put them in a way that is somewhat binding? We have healthcare proxies, we have living wills. And so we're so glad that you can join us, Maura, from a legal perspective. If you could explain a little bit more and, how binding some of these things really are.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk on this issue and putting this panel together. I've really enjoyed hearing from all of the medical practitioners first. And so there's just one basic concept I want everyone to take away who's listening in on this, which is a concept that planners win. In our practice, we actually earn far more money as attorneys if people don't plan. And we do a ton of community engagement to try to encourage people to plan. Like, it's not how we want to earn our money, it's not. But we earn far more when we bring an emergency guardianship petition for someone who did no planning and needs to give authority to an only child who's been with them their whole life. Like, there's no contest whatsoever. That's still a trial because it's considered a deprivation of your civil liberties to have a guardian appointed. Every guardianship proceeding in New York is a trial. So planners win because guardianship is only needed when you haven't signed legal documents. Everyone over the age of 18 needs legal documents along the lines of a healthcare proxy and a power of attorney. Those are two non-negotiable legal documents everyone needs once a person turns 18. We actually do a fair amount of advanced directives for kids before they go off to college, But the older we get, the more age is a major risk factor for an incapacitating illness, the better our advanced directives need to get. And it's really important that we not delay, because none of us can time when we might lose capacity and the inability to sign a legal instrument. So a healthcare proxy needs an agent. And has to express whether you want artificial nutrition or hydration, or your agent doesn't have the authority to make decisions in that area. Generally, we're using a companion document in New York called a living will to create a separate writing about our clients' clear and convincing evidence that they don't want end-of-life treatment. Now, in this area, I always say, doctors and hospitals are our friends. They want their clients or their patients, our clients, they want their patients to have advanced directives. We never, ever, ever get a call from a hospital or doctor that says, I don't think that healthcare proxy you signed is valid. I took a look at it and I don't think it meets New York's legal standards. They never fight us on it. They actually want their families that are supporting the patients and loved ones to participate and help problem solve and meet a patient's goals. Where we encounter the most legal difficulties is actually in the realm outside of hospitals and doctors with powers of attorney. Fundamentally, a power.
Maura, you're muted. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. Okay. Did you lose me at where I started?
Power of attorney. We were just starting to talk about that.
So fundamentally, the other legal document everyone should have, and this is the homework I always give when I give community lectures like this. Go home. If you're home, pull it out now. Like, pull out your estate planning folder. And in your estate planning folder, if you've done planning, there should definitely be a will, because most people call their lawyer and they say, I want a will. Now, when people call us and say that they want a will, we say, great, we're going to give you a really good will, but we're actually more concerned about you while you're alive. So we're also going to work with you to develop healthcare directives and a really robust power of attorney to keep you out of guardianship court. Many lawyers, when they're contacted to do a will, if it's not their main practice area, let's say they're a real estate lawyer here and a commercial lawyer there, they'll give their client a will and no other advice about the need to do powers of attorney and healthcare proxies. So I actually do a lot of lawyer training to try to educate lawyers about the importance of working more fully with their clients on planning. But fundamentally, everyone needs healthcare directives to make healthcare decisions and name an agent in case they can't make their own. Then they need a power of attorney for everything that isn't a healthcare decision. Your loved ones need to be able to file income taxes if you lose capacity. They need to be able to navigate healthcare billing. They need to potentially be able to protect assets from unreimbursed healthcare costs, such as a long-term stay in a nursing home or a 24-hour home health aid. Those are all the things that can be set forth in a power of attorney ahead of time and just make things so much easier for a family. And so that's why we say planners win, because when we're doing that reactively after a health event, it costs a lot more money in time, like legal spend, and also just time at a moment in time when families are really overwhelmed by the loved one's health issues. And then in terms of proactive conversations, I just agree with everything that all the panelists have said so far. When we're doing planning with someone, let's say someone hasn't lost capacity, but they've come to us after getting a stage 4 metastatic lung cancer diagnosis, and they're in my conference room, and we're doing these documents. Everyone, including the lawyers in the room, we have a pit in our stomach, because what we're talking about are not hypothetical issues in that moment. We're talking with them at a moment when there's a lot of fear that this is going to happen soon. And I mean, we have the tissues handy. Like, it is really like, they are very emotional engagements when we're doing them, when there is just a pending very serious illness that a client is receiving treatment for and the outcome is uncertain. Much better to do your planning when we're like, okay, God forbid something happens, let's just take care of this and never think about it again. And then if something does happen, you've already taken care of that. So after getting the diagnosis, you don't then have to go straight in and also layer on a really complicated legal conversation and scenario planning at a moment when, like, your mind is just not there. So I can't tell you how many estates we've actually administered where there was no advanced planning done and they were in a terminal illness for a year, but could not bring themselves to come into our office for that last year of their life. So it's hard. It's really hard. I think that the sooner people over the age of 18 can start to do estate planning, the better. And then doing a review of it every 3 to 5 years is just such a gift to your family. And my mom was a nurse for over 50 years. She worked at a hospital in San Francisco where I grew up. And she went to nursing school there, then worked at the hospital that trained her as a nurse, and then worked at the clinic next to the hospital. Like, literally, I think she worked there all in like 60 years. So she was cared for at that hospital in her final stages. And it was really sudden. And studies do show that medical practitioners stop treatment sooner than any other patients. And I often say to my clients that, like, my mom's parting gift to us was she used her final moments of capacity to meet with her treatment team in the ICU and stop treatment. Because my dad never would, like, the emotion of a spouse or children to do it is so hard. And so everyone goes through their journey in that moment differently. And the more that we can prepare your patients and my clients to communicate wishes, I wholeheartedly support. It's very hard to be the proxy in that situation.
How binding are living wills? Because I know when I did mine, I went to a lawyer, I've got my living will, and he said, make sure you have a healthcare proxy that will carry out your living will. You know, my son, if I appointed him, would bronze me. He would never stop, you know, despite my wishes. So I had to make sure that, you know, so is that not legally binding as much? Like, can a
I'm gonna
doctor
talk about
override
that.
a family member?
I'm really glad that you asked that, but I often joke the opposite, that, like, if I had a cough, my son would try to stop treatment. You know, so like, different adult children present along the, like, differently along the spectrum there. But what I always reassure my clients is that the proxy has final say. The way we draft our document, the living will is meant to be this clear expression, but the discretion of if there's ever any confusion between what the proxy wants and what the living will says, we go with the proxy as the one making the final determination. We're really expressing our living will in our law firm with all the different types of therapies that would be considered treatment as opposed to palliative care, and about really stopping treatment-based things if we're really more in an end of life situation, or we've triggered the different metrics. One thing I want to clarify, because this happens at least once a year in my practice, I get a call from an adult child, and the adult child says to me, I need the DNR that you help my mom put in place, or my dad put in place. And I always say, a healthcare proxy and a living will are not a DNR. DNRs are doctor's orders. But what can happen is, if a patient lacks decision-making ability, the proxy can come in and work with the treatment team in the hospital and put in a DNR, or work with the outpatient treatment team to put in a non-hospital DNR, typically in New York referred to as a MOST form, a medical order for life-sustaining treatment. So where people, I think there's confusion about the bindiness of proxies and directives is in a non-hospital setting. Let's say someone's being cared for in the community, they're 95 years old, and they don't have a MOST form. And the paramedics come and the healthcare proxy is there saying, my mom wouldn't want treatment. Well, the paramedics legally have to treat until the patient gets to the hospital. And then that's where the proxy can work with the treatment team and develop the treatment protocol from there. So there's this really important opportunity for community-based physicians to be proactively talking with clients about, do you want a MOST form? And I'm noticing a big shift in the last 5 years, where when I raise this issue, more of my clients have MOST forms than they had in the past. So I think that there's been real progress in this. But it's just definitely something to be aware of in supporting people in the community who wouldn't want treatment, and making sure that they have the right doctor's orders signed ahead of time.
Can I ask and sort of add something to that, Maura? Thank you
Sure.
for that explanation. I think that some folks, in terms of the advance directive, any type of document, are very intimidated by the details of the questions, especially when they're well. So, like, distinguishing it from the MOST when they may be very elderly or really having had an acute illness. But they're intimidated when they're well to think about things like, well, I don't know if I'd want to be on a ventilator. I don't know if I'd want a feeding tube. But isn't it equally important, even without specifying the details, that you assign someone who you think would be able to make that decision for you? That's part one of the question. So the healthcare proxy, the assigning of the surrogate is not exactly the same thing as articulating like the menu of choices, which can be very overwhelming. And part two of the question, if you would go through, like, if you don't have a healthcare proxy, like the hierarchy of surrogacy based on the New York Healthcare Decision Act, so people understand, if you don't have a healthcare proxy, who is the hospital by virtue of the state going to be looking towards? So those are my two questions.
Sure. And I mean, I think that the hospital universe is so lucky to have that backup statute. Because, for example, financial institutions don't have a surrogacy statute. They have a hard no that they have to give a spouse and children if they can't produce a power of attorney. So, big picture, to answer your question, it is really important for people to name the person and persons in sequence that they want to be making healthcare decisions if they ever can't make their own. Because otherwise, you're going to, within the healthcare realm, default to a state law that's going to give decision-making rights first to any legal guardian appointed, and if none, then to spouse and children, and kind of follow a natural progression of next of kin, whether they're the appropriate people or not. In terms of the overwhelmingness of the decision, and I think Dr. Wertheimer, you were the one who might have mentioned in your first discussion on this panel, the importance of talking about goals. So I try when on the planning side, when I'm working with people, to just break things down to really simple concepts. And in the healthcare realm, I use, if you think of like two very opposite ends of a spectrum, I had one client with a severe health diagnosis. I was doing a hospital signing of his directives in Manhattan at Columbia Presbyterian. And he wanted me to put into his healthcare proxy, he's in his late 80s, that he wanted his family to take heroic measures to keep him alive. And so that's one end of the treatment spectrum. And I was actually able to persuade him to put in his legal documents that his family was familiar with his known wishes. Because I just really didn't want to put in black and white heroic measures to keep him alive. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is basically like an Amsterdam like I want you to off me if I can't eat lasagna, okay? Right? So, or like my loved ones know, like just take me to a cliff and I'll like jump off. So like that's the other end of the continuum. But I really do just break it down fundamentally with my clients of A, euthanasia is not legal, and B, you don't want to burden your loved ones with taking heroic measures to keep you alive. Like that's like really cruel. So big picture, what I'm hearing is, one set of these people want the least amount of intervention possible. The other probably don't even want to sign living wills. Like a living will is not for them. Most people, I would say 99% of my clients sign a living will. I have a template I do not deviate from. I tell them, you want your living will to look like every other living will in New York State, promulgated and recommended by the New York State Bar Association. Do you want to create a separate letter of intent? Great. If you want to have conversations with reverends and palliative care teams, great. But when it comes to like legally binding, I want it to be pretty uniform and standard. And I don't want it to become a creative writing exercise with the baseline of documents of a New York State approved healthcare proxy and a New York State approved living will. I really want it to I want it to encourage conversations around those documents. Anything extra is fine. But Dr. Smith, I see the perplexed look on your face, so I'm going to throw it back to you. Do you disagree with that approach, or is there anything that you wish that as lawyers we were doing or thinking about before people land in your domain?
No, I actually was just nodding along, but I think one of the main things that I do want like my patients and their families to sort of understand is that like the hospital is a pretty it's very aggressive things happen in the hospital. And sometimes there's a misconception where patients and families like, yeah, I want, of course, like, you know, when you ask it, do you want to be resuscitated? Like, of course I want to be resuscitated. I don't want to die. I want to, like, you know, live forever. But there's the thought that, like, if you actually do pass away and, you know, the team comes in, does CPR, puts you on a machine, like, you're not going to leave the way you came in. People think like, of course, you know, just do everything possible and I'm going to walk out of the hospital because that's what they see on TV. But I think I want them to know, like, the knowledge, I want them to know, like, listen, if we do this to you, what success looks like, a successful resuscitation attempt can often, like, the best case scenario is often you're going to go to a nursing home and live out the rest of your life with a feeding tube and hooked up to a ventilator. And people don't know that. They're really surprised. And, you know, so it's, you know, it's going along with, you know, what I want to impart to my patients and families is like, you want to know, like, how do you want to live the rest of your life? Like, if, and a lot of times it boils down to, if I can survive and be me again and, you know, interact with my family, have good times, be with them, then they would want all of that. But they don't realize that oftentimes that's not going to happen with the most aggressive of care. So I think it's sort of making sure that people do understand, like, this is what happens, you know, in a hospital when somebody dies and they don't have it as directives.
That's a really good point, Liz, because, you know, we see on television and someone heart stops and they do a few compressions and they're back. And unfortunately, that's not always the reality. It's very rarely the reality. Sometimes it is, but rarely it's the reality.
Right.
But, you know, but the other side of that is sometimes people, I think, are afraid to have these conversations because they think if they have, you know, a living will, or if they have this, they're not going to be treated at all. They're going to just come to the hospital. And that's not it either. It's like when, you know, so it's important to clarify, you're going to be treated. If you have a DNR, it doesn't mean they're not going to treat you. But if that treatment is not going, you know, and the end of that treatment is not going to be in line with your goals and your desire for how you want to live your life, they will not do that.
Right. You know, and oftentimes I'm educating them. I say, DNI is compatible with very aggressive treatment. There's a lot of interventions that we can do short of putting you on a ventilator and doing CPR if you actually pass away. And, you know, I think part of what we see on TV, like you were saying, Angela, you know, there's that myth that, like, oh yeah, the team comes in and like 10 seconds later, you're awake, you're eating breakfast, you're all like, you know, but that doesn't happen because I do, you know, at least every couple weeks, I get people asking, you know, they say, listen, you know, I want everything, but I don't want to be on a ventilator. And I have to explain, like, why you really can't be full code and DNI because you need it all together. You know, it works like in concert together. They don't understand that if that happens, you're not going to just wake up and be yourself again. You're going to be in an ICU, and you may likely wind up in a nursing home if you're very, very elderly and frail with a lot of, you know, comorbidities.
I do see a question in the chat. It says, is a will, healthcare proxy, living will, and power attorney enough? Anything else?
I wanted to address that. I just noticed that as well. There's one additional healthcare directive that we do in my practice. It's a standalone HIPAA authorization form. Now, we waive medical privacy rights in our healthcare proxy, so our agents have full access to our medical records. But under New York Department of Health rules, we can only have one proxy at a time. You can't have multiple proxies. And knowing that families, when they're supporting loved ones, especially in the hospital, are taking turns being present for rounds, or some can go to some meetings, you know, other discussions. We have a standalone HIPAA form where we allow our client to name multiple people who are allowed to be part of the treatment discussion and access to medical information so that there can be that kind of support. So that's the only other medical directive in my view that really is a nice add-on to a healthcare proxy and living will for healthcare decisions. In terms of legal planning, there's like a fuller discussion of property and financial documents like trusts and wills and things like that. But I often say, if I could only have one legal document, period, I would have a power of attorney, because it's not having the power of attorney that ends up leading my clients to have to go to guardianship court to be able to do things.
Right.
Whereas medical directives, you guys are so lucky to have that statute where you do get to talk to next of kin. So I would just really give people the homework to make sure that they have a very thick estate planning folder. I always say, you don't want thin legal documents. This is one area where more really does get you more.
I see another question. It says, can you address the core cost or range of cost to do these documents, as a lot of people may think it's out of their reach? I know there's, like, if you go to newyork.org, you can like download some of these forms, but I don't know how binding those are.
At one point in the future, you will be able to use LegalZoom or a service similar to it and be protected, but it's not there yet. I strongly recommend you use a lawyer for your legal documents, or in our experience, that is again an area where our law firm earns more money doing things too late that should have been done right earlier in the person's journey. In terms of cost, we work with a lot of middle-class families in my law firm, not just affluent ones. I grew up incredibly middle-class myself, and I am committed to that part of our practice. And we try to meet our clients where they are. So we always give complimentary initial consults. We have 2 lawyers on those consults. We talk with the person and we sort of diagnose what we think they need legally. We make some recommendations and give a cost estimate from there. I would say the most planning ever costs for basic planning, and like this is the most it's ever going to cost, is around $5,000, like the most for basic planning. And then when people really have far reduced assets, we do try to have a sliding scale if appropriate.
You know, I think though that just in terms of this cost issue, and you guys can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but even if a person doesn't feel they have the financial means, or they don't want to interface with a legal professional, if they have a conversation with a loved one, and even let's say they go as far as like writing it down, like, dear loved one, this is the way I see the end of my life. These are the things that are important to me. Like, and that loved one knows it or has a copy of it and can say to Katie or Dr. Smith or to the Reverend, like, look what my mother wrote down. Like that, even, I guess I'm kind of going back to what I said in the beginning. Like, you don't have to be fancy. It can be free. Just talking to your family, and you know, some people do write these things down, sort of a informal letter, open letter. This is what I'd like, kind of thing.
Thank you. I have another question. It's for any of the in the healthcare, I guess, area. It said, when my mom was in the ICU, doctors knew she had a living will, and they said this statement over and over, and it upset her. The statement was, do you want comfort or cure? And I said both. But the feeling I got is that I didn't have a choice. Can someone comment on it? I think it was kind of answered, but.
Yeah, no, I actually, I hate when that happens, because there's this idea in healthcare where you can either get treatment or you can be comfortable. And there's like, you can't do both. But with palliative care, I like to, symptom management and comfort, help with pain, help with shortness of breath. That is, I mean, that the whole point of some of our consults is we want to do that. And we can do that while treating someone. So I don't like the either or. And
it doesn't have to be either or, right?
Have to be. And that's one of the first things I like to tell people. It's not about like, okay, the only way you can be comfortable is if you have no treatment. And it's hard because that word comfort care, I don't, it has problems. It's,
I think it's a perception that a lot of people have that we're going to kind of stop caring for their loved one almost. And that's never going to be the case. It's like we said earlier, it's just a different methodology of care where things are focused on something a little bit different. But, we care for all of our patients, some of them aggressively looking to cure whatever ails them, and others to make sure that they are having the best quality of life they can for the journey that they're on. So it's not really an either or, it can be a both. And every different situation is very individualized.
And just to kind of add too, I know we have some clergy on here today. It's also important to have with your members the end of life planning care if they're spiritual or religious. It's not as intense, but it does help a lot of families. I've been through the process with families and they were like, well, we know we need to have some ceremony, but we have no idea what they would want. And so when I was working in a church and my friends, colleagues in synagogues and in mosques, when people wrote down what they wanted, it just made everyone's life easier, not just the clergy, but also the families. They were relieved to know that their mom or dad or loved one wanted this, that. So it encompasses, not just the physical and the legal, but also the spiritual involved. So I just wanted to put a quick plug in that. As we're coming at the end of our time, and I just wanted to thank the panelists so much. This was so informative and so wonderful. And thank you for sharing your knowledge and your gifts and your expertise. And this has been recorded, so it will be available afterwards. And please feel free to share it. And as you said, Maura, planning is winning all around, right? Planning is winning, and planning does not mean we stop care, as Katie said, and it's about goals of life and physicians having these conversations early on. It's just been so wonderful to hear all the different perspectives, and that birth plan analogy I'm going to be taking with me also. So with that, thank you everyone for being a part of this this webinar. Thank you for our participants who signed on, and we look forward to having more information about this in the future. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you. Thanks, Angela.